Well, I'm Bradley Alisea. Today I'm going to talk about Public Events 1. This is part of our series on contributions, public events, and discussions. So let me share my screen and I'm going to share some resources with you. This is our selection of resources on Public Events 1. So first I'm going to share a diagram I made with you. This is providing feedback and creating issues. So as you can see, there are two pathways to this flow chart. The first one is a pathway where we have a wiki that we've developed, and it says all of our resources to our community on it. And we consult a wiki stub called Open Source Contributions, Bug Reports, and Feature Requests. And this is a path that allows you to go from some GitHub issue form to creating a formal issue that's then closed by the internal team of people. So this path A, you go to the stub on the wiki. You go to the issue creation page on GitHub, which is a form that gives you a number of options to fill out. You choose a template, and we can talk about this in another session, how you create these templates for GitHub forms. You fill out an issue template according to the expected behavior. You tag the code owner in the issue. So the code owner is the person who owns that repository that you're leaving a comment or an issue on. And then the code owner and others will comment and suggest next steps. And then the issue is either resolved or closed. So this involves our internal team of developers or our community manager interacting with the contributor to solve these problems and to resolve an issue. So this is largely for, like, if you want to initiate an open source request, or you want to report a bug, or you want to ask for a feature. But we have another session we have another sort of pathway for feature requests, so that's not so important. The second path is to incorporate comments and feedback in the app itself. And so in this case, this is where someone leaves a comment or the app feedback button. So in the app, there's a feedback button. You hit it and you can leave a comment. Then this comment is handled through a special tool that's used. The output is put into a GitHub channel or a Slack channel, and then the team will internal development team will pick it up and act on it. And then this is, there are a number of different ways you can go here, but at the end of the day, you can turn this into a GitHub issue and it can be addressed by the development team. You can also have the code owners tagged in it. They can suggest next steps and the issue is resolved or closed. So there are two ways a contributor can interact with the open source community and sort of developing solutions for software. You can either have someone who's actively involved or then someone who's passively involved and hands the issue off to other people who will make things happen. So this is a nice strategy for helping people choose one of those two paths. So what does that have to do with public events? Well, public events are definitely for that active class of user. The active users are the ones who are going to be developing, actively putting things together and making GitHub commits and things like that. So for them, we have these work events that I will go over, but you also have people who are passively interested in contributing to the software's development. And maybe they want to participate in an event, and maybe in a more hands-off way. They maybe don't have time to do open source contributions, but they might want to contribute just by commenting or just by leaving their feedback. Maybe something is wrong and they want to report it. So those, we want to involve multiple types of people in our community, not just like, people who can work on big problems, but people who just care about the product. So this is our guide to public work events. In the Rockware community, there are 4 types of public event. There's the Hackathon, the Ideathon, the Docathon, and the Sprint. And so these are 4 types of coordinated work session that allow collaborators to get together at a defined time and make progress on a set of issues. So the idea here is that we have these public events for people to, and these are active contributors, to make some progress on their events in a timely fashion. If you're not being paid, or if you're being paid and maybe you don't really, you have other responsibilities, you want to be able to clear your calendar and find time to really make some of these things happen. And so that's why we have these public events. So the first one we'll talk about are hackathons. And that's where it typically involves experimenting with and exploring code, and then creating follow-up issues from the results. So the term hack or hackathon is a very contentious definitional history. There was the movie Hackers where people talked about hacking the planet. And it's usually something that's creative. It's something maybe some people see it as malicious. But hackathon just really means experimentation and exploration. And usually, hacking is, just hacking at something. It's informal, but it's also, experimental. So it can be directed. It's not necessarily malicious. But the idea is that we want to let people experiment and explore things in a defined time period, and then have them do something at the end that leads to next steps. So we have them create follow-up issues from the results of this experimentation. So, you might hack on something for a couple of hours on a Saturday, and then you might create a set of issues around that exploration, and then suggest next steps. So I played with the code for 4 hours, and I figured out I could do this, this, and this. And then that leads us to these issues that we can then assign to people. And we couldn't do this if we hadn't have done this session. Sometimes hackathons are very clarifying if done right, and if we really focus on the right kinds of things to experiment with. The term hackathon means clever marathon. And this idea of this type of session is to find new solutions to persistent problems. So as in scientific experiments, you don't necessarily want to just throw everything at the wall. You want to pick your battles, and you want to find the things that are most likely to work, or maybe things that are maybe less likely to work, but you want to see if they work. And so this helps you find these solutions. So there are a couple of things that we can look at here. There's this Hacker Earth article on Complete Guide to Organizing a Hackathon. There's How to Run a Successful Hackathon. There's Talk AI Hackathon Platform Benchmarks. And then I always like to include these adversarial examples. So you want to run a hackathon? Think again. And participation equity via pre-hackathon session. So the first one is Complete the Guide to Organizing a Hackathon. It really kind of walks through how to organize a hackathon. What does it involve? What kinds of things do we want to do? So there's this demystification of hackathons. It's very popular in a lot of different settings. So from machine learning to the Internet of Things to bots to augmented reality, all different industries are using this approach. This is a way to crowdsource solutions. And you want to conduct a hackathon just because it's an improvement over traditional innovation management processes. They allow you to kind of do things in an agile fashion. They promote multidisciplinary collaboration, and they have shorter innovation cycles than typically is the case with some of your other daily activities. So you can speed up this the tempo of innovation. You can also bring people in from multiple backgrounds, and that's the sort of the magic of the hackathon. And so this is the process of innovation. You have ideation and execution. The ideation involves discovery, of course, ideation, and then POC creation, which is where you check for novelty and align to a strategic set of goals. And so this is the hackathon where it sort of dwells, and then the execution is for later after the hackathon, but you at least orient your resources towards that. So, there are a lot of ways you organize a hackathon. One of the ways we do this is to have so one of the ways we can organize a hackathon is to have pre-hackathons. And so this leads us to this participation equity via pre-hackathon session. So this was a hackathon in Vienna. This had a number of participants. And one of the things you want to avoid in hackathons is where expertise is bifurcated. So, you don't want to have people who are really well skilled in coding, and then people who don't know what's going on, and then bring them together and just, they don't have any idea what's going on. And so some of them actually do very well, and some of them flounder and are lost. You want to avoid that. You don't want to necessarily exclude people from different backgrounds. You want to bring everyone up to at least a basic level of competency. And so that's what this pre-hackathon session is. And a pre-hackathon session is where you go in and, maybe a week before the hackathon, you give people some background materials. And they either need them or they don't. But if the people don't know what's going on, we'll at least have a baseline of expertise. Another pre-hackathon activity is to have to sort people out before they come to your hackathon. So you can get background information on them and say, what do you do? Are you a coder? Are you an ideator? And then maybe you have coders and ideators come together. You pair them off, you have them work on a problem. But you still want to have them, you still want them to have the basic level of sort of knowing what's going on. And this applies to coders as well as ideators. So you want ideators to have like a base level of coding knowledge, but you want the coders to also have a base level of ideation. And so that's an important thing, because you want people, when they talk to one another, to appreciate what each other is saying. If people come from widely different backgrounds, you want to bring them together, but you want to pair them off in a complementary way. But you also want to make sure that they understand why they're there and what each other has to bring to the table. So this is a way to do this. It's a very nice way to go about creating equity in these events, and it helps the event run much more smoothly. So, so this one is, so you want to run a hackathon, think again. And this article was largely about just, you want to run a hackathon, but you don't really think that it requires a lot of planning, or you think it's going to solve all your problems. And so that's not exactly the case. It's actually much more likely the case that you won't get everything you want out of it, but that's okay. They're not supposed to solve all your problems. This article, Talk AI Hackathon Platform Benchmarks. This is a nice article on measurement. And so this is an advertisement for a certain platform. So they're doing they're kind of forcing their ideology on you. But the basic idea here is that you can create ways to measure hackathon performance and different benchmarks. And so they kind of go through some of the tools you might want, kind of the things that you might want to measure, outcomes. So those are very good to consider as well. So that's what we have to talk about with hackathons. Hackathons are nice tools for exploration, for moving your project along. But as we'll see later, there are other events that are better for that. So Docathons are versions of hackathons that focus on documentation. And so developing documentation is actually a very important thing in a lot of software projects, and it's very neglected sometimes. Sometimes we just jot down some notes, or we make some annotations in the code and we leave it at that. And of course, that's massively inconvenient for casual users or for people who are just coming into an ecosystem and they have no idea what's going on. So this is where docs become really important. Now, I mentioned the wiki that some communities have, and this is where you define key terms, define key ideas or things that are happening in the community, and you have them as a reference. So people can go there, they hear a term, they want to find out a process or procedure, they can go to the wiki. But the wiki, of course, needs to be maintained, and people will have, there will always be new things coming up. There will always be things that need to be updated. And so Docathon allows you to do that, to update the wiki, to develop documentation that's customized for the community, customized for their needs. I think I may have talked about creating tutorials in an open source fashion. So this is where someone comes into the community and they want to create a tutorial for something which doesn't exist. And so they create their own tutorial. And there are some standards that you would follow. And that would be a good example of something you could do at a Docathon, or something that would lead to a Docathon. There are a lot of opportunities to do this, but this is basically the idea. It's a hackathon, but it's special, focused on documentation and maybe tutorials and wiki-like activity, building wikis and updating them. So there are different ways you can do this. You can also look at interactive docs, which are, which go along with your API. So you might have exercises that you have people do while they use the API to get them used to that environment. And so that's another thing you might want to address in your document. Basically, you want to plan your Docathon out like you would plan out a hackathon. You would want to have specific things that people do. You would want to build upon concepts in the community that exist. You want to make sure that you have something that people want and need. And so all those things can be addressed before the hackathon. And again, you could have a pre-hackathon session that would allow you to, sort of get everyone up to speed. Like, are there editorial standards that need to be? Or how do I, when we're in the document, how do I commit things? If you have documentation, technical writers are maybe not as up to speed on some of the coding procedures as the coders are. And, you want to have a mix of people who know how to write well and people who know how to code well, because sometimes those skills don't always come together in a package. And I'm not trying to be like, I'm not trying to insult anyone. I'm just saying that a lot of times those are two different skills developed separately. And so, that's something, one of these interdisciplinary collaborations that we hear so much about, is that you can bring together writers, technical writers, and people really are into the code, and you can really have some nice documentation at the end. So there's a hackathon for documentation example here. This is the BEM hackathon. So this was someone's personal experience with the Docathon, and they worked on some of this stuff. They basically got feedback on the current state of documentation, what's lacking, what might be improved, what may need to be improved in the future. Setting new goals for future workloads. So as your community grows, as your software develops, you'll always be needing docs, but you need to figure out how to get ahead of those things so that the documentation doesn't get out of sync with the software. So this kind of goes through some of the things that were drafted here. Some problems with the documentation. Sometimes language translations are important. Sometimes making things understandable for different audiences is important. And sometimes, just having basic information. We overlook basic information all the time. We think that everyone knows what it is. And then you have people from the outside have no idea what some term means, or, some basic information that they need. So this kind of goes through this experience. And so that's one example. And there's another example here. This is the conservation labs example. Actually, this is the Open edX. Let's go this way. So this is Open edX. This is Love for Docs Hackathon. This happened in 2021. And so they want to build things that interest them. This isn't a stay up all night fierce competition. Some people think of hackathons as like people who stay up all night drinking Red Bull. That doesn't have to be the experience. This is a time for everyone to get together, collaborate, and make some novel improvements to the platform. And so this is for edX, so they're doing educational things. They want to develop some documentation, so they have a theme, Love for Documentation. And in another one of my videos, I talk about sort of thematic campaigns you can use. So this is an example of that. And you want to target an audience maybe who is really interested in documentation, or maybe they really want to, you really want to impart that's important. So that's why you want to do this type of thing. You want to maybe give prizes, so that motivates people for different categories. So build to last, most ambitious, judge's choice, biggest improvement to the community. All those things, this is just a way to recognize people for their efforts, to get them to do different things, to take different emphases on things. And so this is an example. Another example is the this Conservation Labs Ideathon. So this is actually an Ideathon. So why don't we talk about what Ideathons are? So this is, again, this is the Docathon. you have to plan. Oh, this article here, how to run a hackathon 40 days out. This basically tells you, it sort of comes up with this hypothetical hackathon, and it kind of plans it from T minus 40 days up to like T plus 14 days. And so the process is that you're planning for a hackathon or docathon. You put the pieces in place, you do your pre-sessions, then you execute on the hackathon or docathon. You get people to do this fast-paced work session. And then afterwards, you want to follow up. You want to take your issues that were developed during the session and you want to implement them some way, or you want to bring them out to the attention of the wider community. Sometimes people advertise their hackathons post-hoc and they say, oh, look at this great thing we did. Join us for another one, or here are the issues that we've come up with during the hackathon. Please help us solve them. So there are a lot of tie-ins to this. But it takes planning, and you have to plan this out in a way that allows you to be successful. So then there are also Ideathons. And the reason I kind of got confused here is because, again, this is another version of a hackathon. It isn't that much different. It's a little bit different in that you're dealing with ideas. And so you're now doing Ideathons. And Ideathons are not like hackathons or docathons because they're not code related. They're really about coming up with new processes and action items. So in a lot of ways, they're a lot more diffuse intellectually than a hackathon or a docathon. They force you to have to kind of come up with, like, we want to come up with an idea for X, and we want to solicit ideas in this session. And it's almost like a brainstorming session where people come together and come up with new ideas for things. And so there's this conservation labs example. And this one has this is based on some wildlife conservation work that people were doing in this group. And this is people from all over the world that are collaborating. And they have different ideas, different places, different locations, all different things going on. They have these different projects that they're involved with. And so, but the ideas are, we want to facilitate as many ideas as we can. So they're working towards this Connex Tech Prize, which is it's just a monetary prize that gives you some recognition for your innovations. And so this is a nice way to kind of push ideas out there and get them out and work them out into maybe like a prototype or some type of way to realize what you want to realize. And so this one is an idea for a sprinkler. This is rare behavior change. You want to be able to change people's behavior. How do you do that? Come up with this idea for this item, you make a prototype, and then that's your idea. So you're just taking like things that you might just kind of come up with in the brainstorming session. I guess the way to do this is to beforehand, have people bring a list of ideas to the session and then sort of figure out whether they're viable and then maybe work them out a little bit during the session. The idea being is that you don't want to just have people raise their hand, shout out wild ideas. You want to constrain it a bit, make sure that people have some viable things coming in, and then kind of knock them down one by one, and then actually have, at the end of the day, some really quality ideas. Now, this isn't something that involves coding. It doesn't something that, there may be issues that, get managed afterwards, but they're ideas. They're bigger ideas than like documentation improvements or coding improvements. So keep that in mind. There are other Ideathon examples here. We have this How I Won an Ideathon, which is a nice example here. And so this is kind of talking about Circles Life's first Ideathon. So this is a tech startup that they were this is, I think I don't know what Circles Life is, but it's some sort of tech startup. And this person is working in branding and UI UX. So they kind of talk about this company-wide Ideathon that they held in 2018. And the winner actually gets something put into production, perhaps, if it's good enough. So this is something that everyone wants to do. And so this is just a way to come up with products that people will love or improve their lives. So this is a great impetus for the participation. And so this is Circle's Life is a telecom company, the no contract data focused mobile plans. So they have this set of goals that they have in the environment, in the organization, and they want to come up with new ideas for things in the organization. So they kind of go through a lot of these things. This person really enjoyed the Ideathon. There was, you have an idea that gets selected, and then you have to come up with a pitch deck, maybe design mock-ups, and then have a presentation flow that allows you to make people or convince people that your idea is the best one. So this kind of gives you different points. Don't be afraid to venture into something you're unfamiliar with. Be a trailblazer. Ideas can come from anyone and anywhere. So these are just pieces of advice in terms of executing one of these ideathons successfully. So this is, again, another type of hackathon. It's a basic template, a hackathon. And it also, there's this article, Building a Culture of Innovation. So it's very tied into that. It's very tied into building that culture of innovation and promoting new ideas in an organization and so forth. This is good, I think, if you were dealing with things, if you wanted to have ideas for new features in your app, in your mobile app, or if you had a piece of software you didn't really know where to start with new features that you might want to have in it. So in scientific software, what are your users want? You can go out and survey them and figure out the best ones. But sometimes people have ideas that you can't capture in a survey. So that's where you want to have an ideathon. You want to have maybe a wild idea for a use case where people are using the software to model something really bizarre, and you didn't even think about it as a development team. And so that's a place where this would definitely benefit. Now we shift from hackathons to something called sprints. And sprints are a little bit different from hackathons or ideathons or docathons, and that they're focused work sessions where time is devoted to a tightly defined set of tasks. Sprints usually follow up on a hackathon, and the issues created during a hackathon are addressed during the sprint. Sprints can also be used to resolve a set of outstanding issues in a short, focused burst of attention. So this really has to do more with working within the agile style of work, and it's not really. It doesn't really have anything to do with generating new ideas or exploration, or coming up with improvement. It's just kind of a way to work forward. So a sprint would be something you do after a hackathon. It would be a follow-up to a hackathon. So a hackathon is where you play with the software, you come up with these great ideas, you'd make issues, and then those issues sit around for a while. And you're like, okay, how do we get these issues off the table? So let's do a sprint. This will focus our minds and help us close some of these issues out and get some work done. Because people have different, especially in open source communities, people have all different responsibilities, and they don't have time to go back and work on things. But also you can get work in a group, which is useful, because a lot of times when you do have time, you work alone. And it's nice to be able to work together with people on these things. So there's a sprints and project management article kind of going over the usefulness of sprints and project management. It's basically to get people together to get some work done in a fast way, to get things done quickly. Then there's this issue of Kanban versus Scrum. So Scrum is really, this is really something that deserves its own session, but we've talked about Kanban boards in terms of issues. So you have a set of issues, you create a board where different categories, different columns. Those columns define the state of the issue. So it's either to do, it's in progress, it's on hold, or it's finished, and you move the issue around as it progresses. With Scrum is a sort of a style of work. So, they have this agile approach to working in teams. Scrum is sort of one of these things where you have a group of people who don't really have a leader. They all have their own skills, and they're all working together in these teams. And so sprints are part of the Scrum approach to working. So Kanban boards and Scrum boards are similar, except that you have these Scrum teams, and they're working on the board. And so, I'm not going to get into the differences between these, and I'm probably not doing it justice. But it's really, it's a workflow argument for doing these sprints. And so, a Scrum team is a group of collaborators, typically between 5 and 9 individuals, who work towards completing projects and delivering products. The fundamental Scrum team comprises of one Scrum master, one product owner, and a group of developers. So there's the only hierarchy there is that you have someone who's sort of leading the band, and then someone who knows like the product backwards and forwards, and then the rest of the people are working on different issues. And there's no rank or hierarchy in these teams. They're really what you would call a heterarchy, perhaps, for people of complementary skills and they come together. So there's a sprints at Atlassian. Atlassian is a company that runs Bitbucket, among other products, and they use this quite a bit. They use this in their agile approach to teams. And then you have why you should work in sprints, an argument for that. Your first agile sprint survival guide. So this kind of goes through like what you should expect. And so this is something that I think, if you want to survive one of these, this is a good article for this. As teams make the transition to an agile methodology, they often face challenges and obstacles that keep them from realizing the many benefits that agile development promises. So again, as with hackathons, you have this prep period where you have to prepare for the sprint. But again, it's not like you're doing exploration. You're preparing your issues. You're figuring out what you want to accomplish. So it's a bit different than hackathon planning. You assume that people will be well skilled. You don't have to equalize skills. You actually do have to equalize sort of what issues are going to be solved by whom. That's maybe a better way to think about it, because you don't want to have to spend time kind of dividing up the issues. If you want to get the most out of it, you want to assign things to people in advance. The most likely to complete it. So, this early work might be referred to as sprint zero. So this is like the 0 point before the sprint. And so one of the problems with sprint zero is that it most likely won't result in a potentially shippable code if the team is still in the process of assembling. So these things, sprints need to be synchronized with the production process. If you're, an open source project, you want to have things in place before you start. You don't want to just work on things that are half done, and that kind of defeats the purpose. You want this to really be something that is connected to your larger set of issues and your larger workflow. So they're going to go through some of the things that they suggest for project management. And then really just, the event is again, one of these accelerated work sessions. And, you want to be able to get some value out of your sprint. Maybe you want to have a first sprint in your organization to make sure you know how it's supposed to be run. But, it's just really, you just need to plan it out, and you need to have you need to review before and after, again, like the hackathon, and there needs to be this follow-up, which is where if you do something, you want to be able to follow up on it and, be able to report and go to the next step. So that next step might be another hackathon, it might be another sprint, it might be some finished version of the product, and then you start all over again with a new hackathon because you have a new version with new features that you want to do, you want to incorporate, and so forth. So this all goes, this is all sort of, planning from like on the order of, hours to weeks to months to years. So you have all these things. You have the length of a hackathon or a sprint, you have the planning around it, then you have this, product cycle, and then you have a longer period of time where you want to plan maybe your open source project for the next 2 or 3 years. And then you have all these events in between where you can get work done. So that's what a sprint is. So then you have these events for people who are these passive contributors, these are people who might leave a comment in the app if you have a form to fill out, and they, send a comment, very casual comment, or they care about the software and they want to be involved somehow. They want to learn things beyond maybe the software itself. There are a lot of issues, there are fields like AI ethics, or there are fields like, social computing, where you have a lot of issues that come up around software, around data privacy, and other types of things. So for that, we have different events such as lecture series and forum series. So lecture series are where you get invited speakers from a variety of backgrounds who provide an hour's worth of topical presentation and discussion to a broader community. So these could be speakers on different topics relevant to your software. They could be speakers on topics relevant just to computing, and it just engages a larger community of people and gets them thinking about some of these issues. And then who knows, it may lead people to go towards, the direction of making a contribution at some point. The forum series is a little bit different. This is where you have a focused topic and you have a lot of discussion around it. So a forum would be where you'd have people from the community who are already there. They come together, you give them like a topic, you get a speaker, and you have them ask questions of that speaker. It might be someone on like a coding language. They might be an expert at it and they might ask them questions. And again, it helps your community gain cohesion, and it might help people answer some questions they've had. But this again is more passive stuff. The forum series is less so. There isn't so much. It could be people, passive contributors, workers. It could be people who are in the development team. It might bring those people together. So there's a lot of potential there for engaging passive contributors, but also regular, hardcore contributors as well. So then there's a software evangelism idea. And this is where you have, all these events, these sprints, these hackathons, these docathons, but nobody really is using your software. So you need to make the software, you want to get it out to a broader audience. So you engage in something called software evangelism. And software evangelism is where you go out and talk about the product and you build critical mass of support for the given technology. That helps to establish it as a technical standard for the market. So this is typically accomplished by showcasing potential uses and benefits of a technology to help others understand how they can use it for themselves. So GitHub is an evangelism program that you can read about here. There are also ambassador programs, which are where you get people who are power users or hardcore contributors, people who know the product, and you get them to take it back to their own organizations. So ambassadors are people who work in different areas of life, and they take your software back and they kind of promote it in their own organizations. And you can run ambassador programs. It's usually some, where you get them involved in different activities and you get them to sort of learn a lot about the software so they can take it out to their own life domains. This is an article from Red Hat on how I became an ambassador for open source. This is about, how people do this. They become ambassadors because it's, a service activity, but also because they really believe in the product. And OSPO ambassadors, which is Google, something from Google, and they have an ambassador program, OSPO ambassadors. The Red Hat example, of course, talks about, I believe, Linux, and how, this person lived in a world of proprietary software. And then as they started to learn about open source software, they learned about Linux, and then they finally became really interested in it, but they wanted to see it go farther out into the world because they wanted to share their experience with other people. So these people are recruited usually by communities to sort of give people first impressions of an open organization, to kind of act as an ambassador for the brand or for the platform to get other people involved and to promote open source more generally. And so this puts them in a leadership position, people who, again, people are coming into the community, becoming sort of casual contributors. If they become an ambassador where they become an evangelist. It helps them along that path to becoming a more intense contributor. And that's the idea. Okay, so that's all I have to say about that. I think that's enough on that document. And so thank you for attending, and hope to see you next time.